Hi, I'm bored, so we're going to talk about the Vatican Necropolis. Let's go. The necropolis means city of the dead, and beneath the Vatican lies hundreds of Roman tombs that weave themselves and intertwine much like a modern city. If you look at this photo above, this is actually the inside of the necropolis, and you'll see that it actually looks like a typical European street, which I think is pretty neat. The necropolis is actually located 40 feet beneath the current St. Peter's Basilica. The necropolis was present and had been more or less completed in full and in use during the time of Nero, and was initially located between an area called Nero's Circus and what we now know as Vatican Hill. Nero's Circus was an area that had chariot races, public executions, and the martyrdom of Christians at the time. So if you actually look at this photo, the gray area that you're seeing, oh, there we go. The gray area is actually the current St. Peter's Basilica. The red area is where the Circus of Nero was. So it was the area that had the chariot races and all the cool stuff. And that itty bitty blue area right in the center there, that is the necropolis that was excavated. To truly understand the necropolis, you have to understand how Romans treated their dead and their view on death and dying. Romans had a great respect for the dead, and they wanted their loved ones to rest in style, so they would build these lavish tombs that looked a lot like homes. These tombs were grandiose and held many familial generations within them. They also included space so that when the loved ones would miss their family members, they would go and visit and have parties amongst the deceased. Think of it as like if it was Trump and the Kardashians had built their own tombs. This is kind of what it would look like. After Emperor Constantine took over rule in Rome, he offered a swath of land to the Christians, who at this point in history did not have any standing within Roman society. So aside from the necropolis and the Circus of Nero, this area of land that Constantine offered was not being used by the Romans. It was very swampy, it wasn't very fertile, and you couldn't build anything upon it. So what Constantine did, because he really wanted to be a Christian ruler and he wanted to appease the Christians, much like any influencer on TikTok, really, he created the space and created sort of a refugee camp for these Christians within the Circus of Nero. At that point, he was getting frustrated because he noticed that the Christians were not hanging around in the area that he built. They were hanging around the necropolis. So he went up to them and went, "Bro, what's going on?" And the Christians then disclosed to him that actually they rushed and buried St. Peter near the necropolis in a pauper's grave, and they go and worship near him. That's a whole other situation I'd be happy to do a video on because it's really interesting. So after Constantine found this out, he said, I gotta make it right. So he undertook building upon the necropolis in the swampy land. And Constantine ran into one major flaw in his whole plan, and that was, how was he going to remove the bodies of the Romans' loved ones? We're going to talk about that more in part 2. See you there. Not anymore. Time for part 2 of the Vatican Necropolis. Let's go. So when we left off, we talked about Constantine running into a problem where now we have these pagans that are in these tombs, and they would have to either be moved or encased in his future planning to kind of fill the site with dirt. This was a problem because paganism was still the ruling force in Rome at the time. So Constantine did the most American thing that I have ever seen, and he issued an executive order, imperial decree, to have these bodies removed. So he basically told the pagans at the time, either you remove your loved ones and bury them somewhere else, or they're going to have to stay there and be under a Christian basilica forever. This obviously sparked a lot of outrage within the community, and Constantine just stood there and said, I said what I said. In its prime, the necropolis was an open-air graveyard, so it was much like an open outdoor shopping mall where you could walk in, walk out, walk down the street. It was very accessible, but it was also on a steep decline. So basically the Circus of Nero and the land that Circus Nero was on, it eventually kind of did this. And the necropolis was kind of at the bottom like this. So Constantine had to create an embankment and kind of build everything back up to here, which is why it's 40 feet beneath the current basilica. He had to fill this area and kind of pour as much dirt as he could on top of it. Not to mention it's very swampy land, so it would sink, so we'd have to keep going and going and going. The taking away of the necropolis from the pagans was a big deal, because the way Romans coped with the loss of the dead was to go to these tombs, to sit with them, to eat with them, to pray with them, to have parties with them. This is how they dealt with losing someone. And to take that away from them kind of took away from their ability to cope. And remember, a lot of these tombs had generations of families. It wasn't just one or two bodies. We're talking entire family bloodlines that were encased in these tombs. Just as a sidebar really quick, the burial situation and the treatment of dead is a little bit different when it comes to this area, especially in the necropolis. When we're looking at the necropolis, we see a lot of sarcophagi, so people are entombed in sarcophagi that are very immaculate and well kept, and they have the frescoes on them. We also see a lot of cremation and the use of urns, so urns are easily moved, which made that a little easier. But one thing that did kind of make my stomach sink a little is finding out that there are individuals who are buried beneath the floor of the necropolis. So what they would do is they would bury their loved ones, pour over the concrete and the bricks, and then build on top of it and have the space for the family. You weren't exactly going to remove the loved ones that are in the floor. Those bodies remain, for the most part, at least from what we know from archaeology. So, due to Constantine's executive order, imperial decree, many Roman families had to remove their loved ones, especially after spending obscene amounts on these tombs. Remember, these are Trump and Kardashian level type of opulence. But what really bothers me is what we find out next. During excavation of one of the family tombs, which we will cover in part 4, I actually take you through some of the major tombs that you're going to see. It's really awesome. I can't wait. In one of the tombs, we find that there was this ancient writing that was kind of scribbled and carved in charcoal onto one of the already made Roman frescoes. So what they did was they had an expert named Margherita Guarducci. I'm sorry, Italian is not one of the languages I speak. Correct me if I'm wrong, please. Had her come in to help decipher some writing that was found in this tomb, the writing with the charcoal. It says, "Peter, pray for the Christian men and women buried nearby." Christian men and women? Remember, these are pagan tombs, and the ruling force at the time was paganism. Why on earth would somebody write that in a tomb? Turns out that the Christians made very good use of Constantine's decree by taking their loved ones and placing them in the sarcophagi and in the tombs of the pagans. So they just kind of took what was already there and they just said, well, it's ours now, and they took it over. We know this because, not just because of the carving, but because there is frescoes where Romans are known for kind of carving the likeness of the decedent into these frescoes, you know, showing them going to see the gods, showing them shedding their human life and moving on in spirit. But then we see that there's this defacement, literally, of certain areas of the frescoes. But the rest of it's pristine. Well, it turns out that when the Christians did this, they rubbed off the likeness of the individual whose sarcophagi or tomb it was. You know, I guess it was their way of making them feel better, of taking over somebody else's tomb. And it was only on the likeness of these individuals. The rest of the fresco remained intact. It was just the one area where there was a likeness that they would go in and rub off. We also see that there is defacement to headstones on graves, where Christians went in, carved their own message on the headstone, and then put it back. That's kind of messed up, but it did happen. So, I know what you're thinking. Is this the same place that all the popes are buried and just chilling? We'll talk about that in part 3. See you there. Consider this your notification. The Vatican Necropolis, part 3. Let's go. So in part 2, we talked about whether or not the popes were buried in the necropolis, that maybe it got excavated and we continued to use it moving forward. That's not the case. The Vatican Necropolis is not to be mistaken for the Vatican Grotto, which is the current basement of St. Peter's Basilica, where popes are interred if they so choose. So this is the basilica. The pink area is the grotto, the basement, where you could go and see prior popes who were interred, and the blue area is what was excavated of the necropolis. We do believe that the necropolis is much bigger than what we see here, but this is what was excavated so far. So how did people come to know of the necropolis existence? 1939, Pope Pius XI dies, and he asks to be interred in the Vatican's basement. His successor, Pope Pius XII, wanted to be fair to his predecessor, and he saw that the basement of the Vatican at the time was very dank and moldy, and it wasn't a suitable place for the church's figurehead. So he commissioned workers to lower the basement of the Vatican so that there could be more space, and they made it all pretty. During the lowering of the basement, that is where they found indications of ancient red brick as they were digging. And at this time in history, people had heard rumors about St. Peter's bones being buried beneath the Vatican. So some news started buzzing, and it got back to Pope Pius XII. Of course, he was very intrigued at the situation, but instead, his response was, I have some conditions. In order to allow for people to dig and do some more research, his conditions were that the workers could only work at night to not disturb the pilgrims who were coming to St. Peter's Basilica. Condition 2 is that they were not allowed to release any information to anyone. It had to be kept under complete secrecy, no records, no reporters, nothing. And the third condition was that they could not use any power tools. So, optimal working conditions, really. Pius XII did this because at this point in history, there just happened to be a certain group that was coming to power in Europe. There may or may not have been the cause of World War II, and they were on the hunt for occult relics, up to and including the bones of St. Peter. And Pius XII knew that they would raise the Vatican to the ground if they only had an inkling that the rumors of St. Peter's bones were plausible. So then Pius XII puts two men in charge, Father Engelbert Kirschbaum and Ludwig Cass. These two men were in charge of overseeing the entire excavation process. The only problem was that they couldn't be there while the workers were doing the digging. So they could only really go during the day to investigate, to look in further, and to see how things were coming along. Now, Kirschbaum and Cass hated each other. They could not stand each other at all. Kirschbaum wanted to move quickly. He wanted to find St. Peter's bones, and he wanted to be vindicated within his faith. He really wanted to feel like there's merit. And, it would bring more following to the church, and it would be great for Christianity on a whole. Cass, however, he was very tepid. He wanted to move slowly. He wanted to do things properly because he didn't want to risk any damage to any of the ancient structures that were being uncovered. And he also didn't want to risk tipping anyone off. So, needless to say, this whole entire operation was a hot mess. Communication was totally not their love language. With everything going on, the World War and the two headmasters of this entire thing not being able to see eye to eye on anything, not much was excavated in 1940. And part of the reason, too, was Kirschbaum wanted them to only focus on the remains of St. Peter. He didn't want them exploring further and finding other things. He was just laser focused on his mission. However, there is good news that further excavation was done in 2003, and it has now allowed for people like us, you and me, to go and visit the necropolis in the basement of the Vatican. And if you ever get a chance, I highly recommend it. So, we've gotten through the excavation. We've talked about how the necropolis came to be and what happened to it. What is in these tombs? I'll tell you all about it in part 4. See you there. Part 4 of the Vatican Necropolis. This is the final part. And before we get started, I want to say thank you to all of my new followers, all of my old followers. Thank you all for joining me along this journey. Is there something that you want me to cover in terms of history? Leave me a comment below on what you'd like to see discussed. Time for part 4. Let's go. I'm not going to go over every single tomb, but I will talk about the main ones. I implore you to do your own research, and you're welcome to shoot me a message if you want to talk about this. I am always down for a good conversation about history. One of the tombs, Tomb Z, was Egyptian themed. It had a lot of Egyptian symbolism and some Roman mythology pieces as well. We don't know much more other than it was maybe possible someone from Egypt had come and wanted to be buried in the necropolis, and that was what their tomb was themed, or somebody was just an Egyptophile. We don't know, but it is kind of interesting to see that there is an entirely themed room. Tomb A was not further excavated due to structural issues, and this was one of those situations where they said, you know, we want to look for St. Peter's remains, so we're just not going to pursue Tomb A any further. Tomb F was the Cateni family tomb, which had stairs to a second floor. This was a 2-floored tomb. It was the greatest tomb, the best tomb, the one they'll talk about for the ages. This was the first tomb that was discovered when they were digging in the necropolis. What I think is really cool about this tomb is that it had libation holes. So, you know, whenever you want to pour one out for the homies, they had holes for that. It was like if Jersey Shore meet ancient Rome. Tomb H was the Valeri family tomb. This was the largest and most opulent tomb in the necropolis that we have discovered so far. They had full-on frescoes and dyed red stones. This is the tomb where they found that writing that was carved in with the charcoal. This tomb is the reason why we believe now that Christians did go and just make use of the tombs for their own gain. What's really cool about this tomb is that it had its own personal well. So if you were ever thirsty, you didn't have to go back to the village. You could just stay here. They had a well. It's fine. You don't have to leave the party. Stay. Have another drink. This tomb also had cremation space for servant urns as well. So servants did not have to worry about their own burials. They had a place within this Valeri family tomb. Tomb M had beautiful frescoes, and it is the smallest of all tombs. Due to the iconography in this tomb, a lot of scholars believe that it was possibly a wealthy Christian family that made this tomb and kind of disguised it as paganism. The reason why I say that is because there is iconography that looks pagan in nature, but it's kind of off. So, for example, the drawing of the fish and the man, it kind of represents Jonah. So Christian scholars believe that this probably was a Christian tomb. Tomb S is a spot they believed that they found the bones of St. Peter, which if you want me to cover the whole St. Peter debacle, I happily will. Just leave a comment below. So these are the main tombs that we found in the necropolis, and they are very beautiful in their own way. And it really does make you sad to know that it was defaced at one point, and those who designed those tombs for their families no longer are able to use them. And for the rest of eternity, they will never be able to rest in the place that they designed. But this wraps up the series on the Vatican Necropolis, and I implore you to visit the site, to do your own research, to find out more about this, because it is truly interesting. I also recommend that you check out Father Logue's lecture on YouTube for more information. He has done phenomenal research on this, and his lecture is what sparked my love and my interest for learning about the Vatican Necropolis. But that's it. Let me know what you want me to cover next. Okay, bye!